Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the 4 Seasons Winter Tournament here. This is the modern day, and I'm Dave Jones, old emo Dave on the internet, here with the Mason Clark. We are in round 6 of what has been a fantastic day of coverage. Loads still to come, and we are heading into some two newer matchups as well. What a format we got, Mason. Nothing is dominating. Everything is available to play. As we're gonna head into the Living End versus Espagorios now.
Yeah, and this is going to be a pretty interesting matchup. Living End loves to cheat out a lot of creatures from the graveyard. Not the best creatures you've ever seen. A lot of limited all stars, right? We don't have Grief anymore to kind of back you up in that regard. But Espergorio is also trying to cheat out some actual R stars in the form of, Grizzlebrand, Atraxa. So I'm curious to see the kind of dance that might happen here as both players are going to try to get big things in the graveyard to reanimate. But one of them has to be a little bit careful of bringing back the homie on the other side of the table's cards as well.
Yeah, yeah, you can imagine these two players will be doing almost the Spider-Man meme with each other. Like, you
hmm
go for your graveyard, I'll go for my graveyard, and it lines up for some really interesting game twos and threes. Where in game one, usually it's just who was faster. Emilio here is on Living End, and this is sort of, I'd say, like what I know is like classic Living End, and pretty much where the build has found itself now. And I looking through the overall set of the deck, it's just basically all the big bodies, all getting in the graveyard as quick as you possibly can and bring them back out before your opponent can say boo.
Yeah, the big things to note about this deck list going into this matchup for you to watch out for. First, the 4 endurance in the main deck. That's my free bingo square. I can talk to you about how Graveyard Hate is good versus a graveyard deck. What great commentary I can provide to you. The other big one is Deceit is gone from this deck list right now. We saw in the first couple of weeks of Lore and Eclipse, and some players, to be fair, still are on Deceit in their deck. But no Deceit here means it's going to be a lot less disruption on this side of the table against the Goryo's deck. We talked about how Grief got banned, and that really changed this deck up a lot just at the beginning of this round. Deceit's sort of half a Grief, right? You get it on the front, but you get a 6/6 on the back end, and some players have found that very attractive. Instead, we're going for things like Commandeer here in the main deck, which might end up being brutal in their own way. So I'm really excited to see how these small differences have huge impacts in this matchup.
Yeah, certainly feels like one set of the deck where they've teched for the field rather than necessarily if you were just gonna like spin up a league on Magic Online, you might
Mhm.
you might be a little bit more leaning towards that matchup. And yeah, things like in here, like there's no avatar. There's no Dustmourne cards,
Mhm.
and yeah, they've really tacked this one to be ready to attack the graveyard, and you can do that well. You've got Prowess, obviously, which uses the graveyard quite well. Obviously, you got like Yawgmoth, you want to stop that from having its engine. So
Mhm.
actually, kind of like makes sense where Modern is at the moment.
Mhm.
Gorios effectively is going to have some very similar stuff, but not access to green, which is going to mean like that endurance isn't a disruptive piece, and they'll be looking to do things in a much faster way. Hopefully, turn two.
Yeah, so big cards to look out for here in the feature match area, especially if you're a fan of Goryo's. Psychic Frog early could be disastrous. Not only is it a great way to get cards and apply pressure, you can just hold, 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 right? And then the moment they go for the Living End, dump your hand. It's pretty hard for them to get a Psychic Frog off the table in game number 1 without a Living End being cast. So that's pretty huge. Emperor of Bones, one of my favorite cards from MH3. That card is pretty devastating here. It's just a one of, but the fact that they can slightly tax that graveyard on the side of Living End will make it so they might need to pull the trigger a little sooner than they would like. And then to Fairy Time Reveler, sort of saving the best for last here. If this one of does stick, Living End will be unable to cast their marquee card since you can't really cascade with Teferi in play. So you just don't get your card. It's not the greatest place in the world to be. You don't want to play a 3-mana 2/2 Shardless Agent. So those are some things to look out for, and they're all really, really important. Not even counting the fact that, like you mentioned, on turn 2, we might be hitting you with an Atraxa.
Yeah, absolutely. And the Esper deck might find itself in an interesting position. Usually the aggressor to try and do the combo, it might end up on the other side of the field to try and be that control in play when it comes to sort of like sideboarding and taking control of the post sideboard games. But yeah, looking forward to this one, and we'll be getting into the action to see who now can take this to 6-0, which I see 9 rounds, like a long day. So, they're starting to get to a point where they can start to maybe take a little bit of a relax, but they still definitely need one or two wins to get themselves over the line yet. Kicking off on the living end side, dropping a beside you and just saying go. Let's see how we can line this one up on the Esper side of things. That's what you want to start with. You want to start with a fetch, and you want to be dropping a Traxxas in turn two. Let's see if they get Magical Christmas Land.
Yeah, and in this matchup too, it's one of those spots where you're fine going for the Atraxon too, just because you get things out of your deck that will then lock the game up. Where normally you want to try to get that turn three Gorios, right? Get your Atraxa, ephemerate the Atraxa, leave the 7/7 in play. So I'm curious to sort of see how this goes. Another thing we haven't talked a lot about is just Grizzlebrand on turn two. Draw 14, put a bunch of things in the yard. Yes, endurance can stop that, but it can also be pretty backbreaking, right? If you don't have the endurance, it just probably means there's an Atraxa or something like that in the yard. And you also, if you draw 14 cards, even if you can only keep 7, you probably have some of those other cards we talked about that can take over the game. So I'm curious to see how that goes as we do see a shock and pass.
Sure, and you can imagine this is the Surveil, but yeah, I have been wrong today. But I'd pretty much bet on this being a Surveil. And again, yeah, let's see what we see.
Yeah,
Um,
surveil lands have really shaped modern a ton. When I was working on MH3, this is probably my biggest misses where I was like, oh, people will probably play one or two outside of decks like Living End and Gorios and Rhinos. And it just turns out everyone wants two, maybe three of them here. But it's incredibly powerful, these cards in both of these decks, sort of acting like a free draw spell, more so than we even joke about in other decks.
Yeah, incredible world, isn't it, that we've got to where actually you when thinking about putting your modern deck together, you start thinking about what surveil lands I'm putting in before what shocks I'm putting in, because
Hmm.
how important and powerful they are to a strategy or something that you're trying to pull away with. Wasn't that perfect top though, but they did surveil away a land, and I guess I think we can see Psychic Fog on the far right of the hand, so probably thinking about like. Are they free to deploy it or not? That's a
Hmm.
scary side of the field from Living End to sort of just be sitting up with 2 mana, because you start to think about, right, do I need to be holding up my defense here?
Hmm. Yeah, even cards like Faithful Mending can be pretty frustrating here for the living in player because, yes, there could be all this interaction, but also, what if you go for it and they just, Faithful Mending and put one of the big things in the yard? Or, we keep talking about like Grizzlebrand, Atraxa. Well, what if you just put a Quantum Riddler in the yard, right? Like, you currently don't have a very big graveyard. That card will actually probably help you stabilize. And with cards like Solitude Ephemerate in the Scorio's deck, the living in deck really needs to have a good living in to actually fight through. This was kind of the weird thing back when MH2 was the big metagame and living in was probably the second best deck in the format. You would sometimes go for these early living ends against Solitude decks, and they would just, evoke in response, bring back a Solitude, and then ephemerate the Solitude, and the game would be nearly over. So, same sort of pressures here. This is kind of a disastrous matchup, but it's by no means unwinnable. Main deck endurance goes a very long way in making this a very playable game.
Yeah, no, for sure. And they're just taking their time. They're just feeling it out. There's quite a substantial bit of real estate in the Emilio's graveyard, though. So if they when they can have their go off turn is very, very big set of creatures. I think we saw Curator and Mystery. You definitely see a generous Ent there as well. But we'll see what they come up with. Here comes the Surveil. Is it what they want to see? No, we're gonna be faithful mending.
And mending here, helping sculpt your hand, helping sculpt the Gorios. Also, just helping you make sure that living in is less of a problem. Is yeah, look, Quantum Riddler very quickly thrown into the graveyard. Even if you can't stop the living end, yeah, with the extra Psychic Frog as well, now you've got a little bit of a force to fight back with.
Yeah, exactly. You put yourself in a position that at least you can start developing the board, and you can start putting them in start like siphoning through and making sure you've got your counter spells up. Each hand, like we've got 6 cards in hand, so I'd like to think that there's plenty of defense there. We are tapping 2. Are we gonna do that? No, we're gonna try and resolve a frog. Are we gonna let this through? Is gonna be the question. Yeah, the frog is going. And that also opens up opens up other opportunities, such as like flare denial opportunities, right? So, like now that here comes the endurance, it early endurance, would you say?
I think a proactive endurance might be how I describe it. This endurance here, getting rid of the graveyard, forcing Mateo to actually have to discard something if we go for our own living end, and also just getting some pressure on the board, right? You want to be able to kind of tussle with this Psychic Frog and force the discard of a lot of cards so that maybe your second endurance can actually clean up everything, right? Ideally, you are going to want to not discard your biggest cards right away as Esper Gorios because you don't want to